The reputation of Evelyn Cross arrived before she did. It moved through the halls of halcyon towers in lowered voices and stiffened backs, in the way assistants straightened papers and managers swallowed unfinished sentences. She was the angry female CEO, brilliant, ruthless, and endlessly unsatisfied. On that gray Monday morning, the rain streaked the glass walls like nervous sweat as she entered the lobby, heels striking marble with sharp precision. Her face was calm, but inside her chest, a familiar pressure churned, the kind that came from carrying too much responsibility and never allowing herself to feel the weight of it. She barely glanced at the clipboard in her hand as she signed off on a final hire, a new janitor, temporary contract, no interview needed. Another invisible worker to keep the building clean while she fought fires upstairs. Daniel Reyes stood near the elevators with a mop in his hands, shoulders tense, trying to look smaller than he felt. At 34, he had learned that invisibility was sometimes the safest place to exist. After months of being turned away because his resume didn't shine or because he had to leave early for his daughter, this job felt like a fragile miracle. He focused on the floor, scrubbing carefully, telling himself not to draw attention. Behind him, on a bench near the security desk, his 6-year-old daughter Sophia swung her feet gently, clutching a worn pink backpack. She had insisted on coming today. "I like big buildings," she'd said, her voice hopeful. Daniel hadn't known how to explain that big buildings often swallowed people whole. Evelyn passed them without slowing, eyes already scanning her phone for the next problem waiting upstairs. She didn't notice the child. She didn't notice the way Sophia froze mid-swing, her small fingers tightening around the backpack strap. Sophia stared at the woman's back as if seeing a ghost. The sharp suit, the controlled posture, it was older now, harder, but the face turned just enough for recognition to spark. Sophia's heart thumped wildly. She slid off the bench and hurried to her father, tugging urgently at his sleeve. "Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling with certainty. "That's her." Daniel bent down, confused. "Who, mi amor?" "The lady from the hospital," Sophia said. "The one who sat with me when Mama went to sleep forever. She held my hand when I was scared." Daniel's breath caught. He looked up just in time to see the elevator doors close behind Evelyn Cross, the name he only knew from warning whispers. He shook his head gently, thinking grief and memory sometimes tangled in a child's mind. But Sophia's eyes were wet, shining with something deeper than imagination. She watched the closed elevator as if it might reopen, as if the woman inside had unknowingly carried a promise with her for years. Unaware of the quiet recognition unfolding behind her, Evelyn rode the elevator up, jaw tight, heart heavy, never suspecting that a child's memory had just brushed against her life, and that the past she had locked away was about to return, not with anger, but with gentle, unrelenting truth. By the third afternoon, Sophia's patience had turned into quiet determination. She sat on the same lobby bench with her coloring book open but untouched, her eyes lifting every time the elevator chimed. Daniel worked nearby, sweeping slowly, his thoughts split between the job he didn't want to lose and the strange certainty in his daughter's voice from the first day. He had tried to ask her more about the woman from the hospital, but Sophia only said, "She was very sad, Papa." Sad people remember. Daniel didn't know what to do with that, so he focused on his work and let the days pass. That evening, the lobby felt heavier than usual. Executives hurried out with tense faces, whispers of a brutal board meeting floating through the air. When the elevator doors opened, Evelyn Cross stepped out last. The sharp edge she usually carried had dulled, her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she stood still, staring at nothing. Anger had drained away, leaving exhaustion in its place. Sophia felt it instantly. She slid off the bench before Daniel could stop her and walked straight toward the woman. Evelyn barely noticed the child at first. It wasn't until a small voice broke the silence that she stopped. "You don't have to be angry all the time," Sophia said softly. "You were nice before." Evelyn looked down, startled. The child's face was open, unafraid, holding a familiarity that made her chest tighten. "I'm sorry," she asked, her voice rougher than she intended. Sophia tilted her head. "At the hospital. When my mama was sick. You sat with me when the machines were loud. You said it was okay to cry." Her eyes shimmered. "You cried too." The world seemed to tilt. The lobby lights blurred, and a memory Evelyn had buried under years of work and control surged forward, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the woman in the hospital bed who reminded her of her own sister, the little girl who wouldn't let go of her hand. She remembered promising to stay until the end because no one should be alone like that. Evelyn dropped to one knee before she could stop herself, her breath uneven. "Sophia," she whispered, the name rising from somewhere deep she thought was empty. Daniel rushed over, panic flooding his face. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly. "She didn't mean." Evelyn raised a hand, not in dismissal, but in quiet request. "No," she said, standing slowly, her eyes never leaving the child. "She meant everything." She looked at Daniel then, really looked at him, and recognition settled in. The tired eyes. The familiar grief. "You're her father," she said, not a question. Daniel nodded, unsure, protective. You remember?" "I never forgot," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling. "I just thought that part of my life was over." Sophia reached out and slipped her small hand into Evelyn's. "You were sad back then," she said gently. "But you helped me. That means you're not a bad person." Something in Evelyn broke open, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for tears to finally escape. In the middle of her gleaming empire, a child had seen through the armor she wore every day. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Cross didn't feel like a CEO or a stranger. She felt human, remembered, and quietly changed. The change did not announce itself the next morning. There was no speech, no sudden smile that startled the employees of Halcyon Towers. It arrived in smaller, almost invisible ways, the kind that only people who lived quietly learned to recognize. Daniel noticed it first when his schedule was adjusted without him asking, his shift starting earlier so he could pick Sophia up from school on time. He thought it was a clerical mistake until an email arrived with Evelyn Cross's name at the bottom, brief and precise, yet strangely gentle. He read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might disappear. Sophia noticed it differently. The building no longer felt cold to her. People smiled back now. The security guard asked about her drawings. One afternoon, the elevator doors opened and Evelyn stepped out, not rushing past, but stopping. She knelt again, like she had that night, and asked Sophia how school was. Sophia answered honestly, told her about spelling tests and missing her mama, about how sometimes Papa looked tired even when he smiled. Evelyn listened. She always listened. And each time, something inside her loosened, as if the tight knot she had carried for years was slowly, patiently being undone. Weeks passed, and Daniel was called into an office he had never expected to enter. His hands shook as he stood in front of Evelyn's desk, prepared to apologize for something he didn't know he'd done. Instead, she spoke about benefits, real ones. Health coverage. Job security. A future that didn't feel like borrowed time. She told him about a foundation she was starting in his late wife's name, for families who spent their nights in hospital corridors, counting breaths and praying for mercy. Daniel couldn't speak. He bowed his head, overwhelmed, as tears slipped down without shame. Late one evening, when the offices were quiet and the city lights glowed beyond the glass walls, Evelyn stayed behind. She watched Sophia ride carefully on the cleaning cart, laughing softly as Daniel guided it down the hallway. The sound echoed, warm and alive, filling spaces that had once only known urgency and anger. Evelyn felt the truth settle in her chest. Success had given her power, but compassion had given her peace. She had built towers, led thousands, commanded rooms, but it was a child who had led her back to herself. When they walked out together that night, the air felt lighter. Sophia slipped her hand into Evelyn's without thinking, as natural as breathing. Evelyn didn't pull away. She realized then that leadership was not about being feared or obeyed. It was about being present when someone's life quietly intersected with yours, and choosing kindness over distance. And in protecting one small family, Evelyn Cross finally learned that her own heart had been waiting to be protected too.